KJV onlyism is doctrinally wrong, and it's therefore divisive and harmful. I believe these things with all my heart, and with maybe a little extra from different organs, such as my liver, spleen, and duodenum. But if you try to listen to thoughtful people who disagree with you, even King James onlyists, as I do try, by God's grace, to do, you will sometimes have to say to yourself, almost thou persuadest me that I was wrong. That, to me, is one major mark of a good debate opponent. Someone who gets you thinking for a few split seconds, or a few split hours maybe, that maybe you're wrong about something. One of the few brothers who does this for me in the King James only world, I'm just going to have to name his name, is Christopher Yetzer. He's a missionary to Italy, a graduate of Hyles Anderson College. We've spoken on the phone twice, I believe, in the last several years. We've corresponded a fair bit. We messaged privately just the other day. We've interacted publicly online. He is a very gifted guy and studious and has stuff to teach me, and he's very much able to speak with charity. He also has a sincere and edifying testimony of God's saving grace. And though I disagree with him frequently over his King James onlyism, I get the sense with him, as with almost no one else across the aisle from me on this issue, that he's actually taken a lot of time to listen to me. That's a gift. He left many comments, and many insightful and lengthy comments, on my YouTube channel until I finally came to believe, however, that I could no longer justify the time I was spending responding to these comments. I will explain some of that later. But Christopher has been going on the offensive against my viewpoint with greater energy of late, and sometimes it takes opposition to force one to clarify or even refine one's views. I think his thoughtful words have provided me precisely those opportunities: clarification and refinement. I don't have very many public opponents who engage thoughtfully with my viewpoint. I have very, very few who ever make me think, you know, I don't agree, but I can't deny that he did listen to me and didn't just use my video titles as a springboard for stuff he wanted to say, or just pour bile on me with ad hominem attacks. No leaders or institutions within IFB, King James onlyism, have arisen to engage carefully with my viewpoint for 4 years. It's been radio silence for all that time, from those brothers anyway. The leaders of Reformed King James onlyism, too, have not responded to my work in any kind of careful public way. So I can't waste the thoughtful opponents the Lord sends me. And I think Christopher has won the right, the honor, I hope, to be answered publicly. Here we go. I'll start with my own summary of Christopher's case against my viewpoint as the train rattles by. Then I'll offer a set of answers. Then I'll apply those answers to specific things Christopher said. Understandest thou what my planist is? Does that sound good? Here's a summary of Christopher's case against my viewpoint. A basic summary. I'm going to try to be fair. I think that he would use the same words or agree with my representation of his words. First, he thinks the principle that I adduce from 1 Corinthians 14, edification requires intelligibility, just doesn't work on numerous levels. First, he thinks that 1 Corinthians 14 is about tongue speaking and not Bible translation. And here he has given the best reply I've gotten to this argument. He said once that even if 1 Corinthians 14 applied to Bible translation, then it's okay to use the unintelligible King James words in church as long as someone interprets. That's the way it is in 1 Corinthians 14, of course. And that's what pastors do, he said. Touché. I thought about this one for a long time. I will provide an answer soon enough in this video. This one took me a while. Then Christopher goes on to say that my ERI principle, edification requires intelligibility, ultimately produces a dummy Bible, one that aims at the lowest common denominator, the dumbest kid in class. Then Christopher says that I'm inconsistent. I criticize the King James, he says. I do not criticize the King James, anyway, for having difficult words, but I give the ESV a pass for having the unintelligible word Sheol. This is where I probably do need to do some refining of my viewpoint, not just clarification. Thankfully, the train is finally passing. Then Christopher says that intelligibility is a subjective standard. What is unintelligible to one person may be intelligible to another. I certainly don't disagree with him on this, though I will certainly have more to say about it in a little bit. These are thoughtful and serious objections that are worth my time and yours. So I want to offer a few general clarifications and refinements before I get to just a few of Christopher's specific and concrete examples, arguments. First, I do think this is a refinement and not just a clarification. I think what I'm about to say was implicit in my viewpoint, but not stated. I didn't see it as clearly as opposition from Christopher and others has helped me see it now. So I owe Christopher something for helping me here. The value of any principle or slogan, like ERI, is its brevity and pithiness. The downside is that it doesn't get to make all the necessary qualifications. Even a given proverb in the book of Proverbs doesn't necessarily cover all circumstances. Sometimes you answer a fool according to his folly, sometimes you don't. Proverbs 26, 4 and 5. Neither one of these proverbs is absolute. So let me make some qualifications now. ERI is not an absolute, something that pushes language down and down until it's merely a set of grunts and motions sprinkled with emojis. Like all principles except glorify God and enjoy Him forever, the one and ultimate principle, the ERI principle, has limits. In a translation for mainstream church use, I would key the level of intelligibility to the level present in the original for its original hearers at any given place. I've repeatedly said that Peter's statements about some of Paul's writings being hard to be understood is an indication that we cannot and should not expect standard translations of the Bible to make the whole Bible equally accessible. I'm only asking us to eliminate unnecessary linguistic barriers, those created by 4 or 5 centuries of language change. And that means that the level of intelligibility in the ERI principle isn't defined by the class dunce, as Christopher would have me say. I think it's appropriate for some translations to aim, as the NIV does, at 7th graders, the plowboys. But the Bible I actually preach from when I get to choose, the ESV, is aimed, I would say, at the middle-of-the-road adult, the kind of person to whom I think Paul directed his letters, and Moses his stories. In general, too, I'm talking about Christian adults. Bible translations are mainly and usually for Christians. But don't forget, one of Paul's applications of the principle in 1 Corinthians 14 was that even lost people are supposed to get enough out of the public worship service because of the intelligible language, that they are able to hear the gospel and repent. Next, clarification. It would be understandable for someone who hasn't seen my channel or read my work to assume that I'm trying to dumb the Bible down to the level of the dumbest kid on the bus. But the actual examples of unintelligibility that I have adduced ought to define and fill out my edification requires intelligibility concept. That is, I haven't advocated that besom becomes something dumbed down, just that it become broom. I haven't said that chambering should be updated to knocking up. I've said it should be immorality. I haven't said that halt should be diggity faux shizzle. I've just said it should be limp. When I actually use Paul's principle, I don't come up with a dummy Bible, but simply a Bible in contemporary English. Perhaps Paul's principle in 1 Corinthians 14 can be taken to an extreme. I think it can. Christopher shows this. But if, after covering 57 false friends, I've never done this even once, and I don't think I have, maybe it doesn't have to be taken to an extreme. ERI is not an absolute. It's one principle that must be weighed against others. And what English Bible translations do I actually use for Bible study? Are any of them aimed at dummies? Do they read like the lowest common denominator Bible? I don't think so. Next, Christopher says that someone can just interpret the King James for us in those places where we need help. A preacher, of course. And my answer is that, well, yeah, that would be step one. Any pastor who preaches from the King James should always be doing this. And thankfully, many of them do it, even King James onlyists. But what are such pastors doing in those cases? What was well-known King James onlyist, violent King James onlyist Cody Zorn doing when, like nearly any King James preacher worth his salt, he said in a sermon not long ago,
the Bible said, I quoted part of this verse a minute ago, I'll quote it to you now, though, sees what's covered. The Word of God is quick and powerful, means it's alive. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 and 2 said, I charge thee before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick, the living, and the dead.
Zorn was, interpreting King James English. He knew his hearers wouldn't all understand the meaning of the word quick, so he gave the contemporary equivalent, alive, which happens to be the very word that's already standing in the NIV. Why is it okay for Zorn to do this live, but not for the NIV translators to do it, carefully in advance? You need a live interpreter when the speaking in tongues is live. But we're not getting the Bible live every Sunday. We've had it for almost 2,000 years. Someone with perhaps a few more years of study in Greek and Hebrew than Cody Zorn has had can take the time to sit down and interpret it for us, all very carefully. Indeed, when preachers like Zorn translate live, they aren't really translating the Hebrew and Greek at all. They're translating older English into contemporary English. And if Christopher is right in saying that a King James interpreter present in the church service should be sufficient, we don't need a new translation, an update, a revision, then interpretation performed by the King James preacher would have to be itself a spiritual gift. Remember, tongues is a gift, named in 1 Corinthians 14, but so is interpretation of tongues. And you know, I've listened to King James only preachers. I've never met one that, it seemed to me, had a spiritual gift for interpreting King James English. A video I hope to put out sometime this summer will show King James preachers being tripped up by archaic English, just like my work predicts they would be. And what about private Bible reading times when no interpreter is present? What are King James only people supposed to do then? Next, is intelligibility a subjective standard, as Christopher says, and therefore unusable? Well, yes and no. You see, all readers are subjects. Our subjective opinions and experiences have to carry some weight. I once had a critic who kept going after me for appealing to what he called anecdotal evidence, of people misunderstanding the King James. What he meant was, I believe, that all these stories I've told about individual misunderstandings that I and other readers have had because of the archaic English of the King James was inadmissible evidence. I needed some objective standard, according to him. And I'm really wondering if evidence from my and other readers' experience reading the King James is inadmissible, exactly how is one supposed to determine that King James English is causing people to misunderstand God's Word? Giving examples of these misunderstandings, subjective though they must necessarily be, seems absolutely apropos to me. Not just apropos, but de rigueur and germane. The more stories I gather of kids saying, and this really happened at my church, if commendeth means shows, then why doesn't it just say shows? The more I think people who love others shouldn't need objective evidence, whatever that might be, when they have so much subjective evidence. How could they not? Of course, I have repeatedly appealed to more objective standards. The dictionaries, like the greatest English dictionary of all time, the Oxford English Dictionary. Occasionally also I appeal to linguistic corpuses. In my experience, these appeals to the most careful judges of English that we possess are almost entirely ignored by critics of my work. Christopher, for his part, uses dictionaries other than the OED for reasons I simply do not know. When I check those resources that he uses, I find I lack the tools the OED gives me for reading the King James Version. To my knowledge, no King James onlyist has ever said anything about linguistic corpuses or my use of them, either positive or negative. I also wish to say that no one, including Christopher, has responded to my historical theological arguments regarding 1 Corinthians 14. I am most certainly not the only interpreter to see relevance to Bible translations in that chapter. Even the King James translators cite 1 Corinthians 14 in their preface. Those are my general clarifications and refinements, and before I get to a few specific replies to more concrete arguments made by Christopher Yetzer, I want to say this. Even if 1 Corinthians 14 has nothing to do with Bible translation, no legitimate applications to it, do I have to have a Bible principle to tell me that the whole point of a translation is to bring meaning from one language to another, and that if archaic words block that work, that meaning, that an update needs to be made? I think I have Bible verses telling me that besom should be revised, updated to broom in Isaiah chapter 1, so people today can understand it. But even if 1 Corinthians 14 can't or shouldn't be used here, can I still update the coasts of Decapolis in Mark 7 to the borders of Decapolis, which is what the Greek says and what the King James translators meant in their English? Or is this need for updating something I can legitimately learn from simply walking wisely and observantly in God's world? Everywhere I look, language changes, and any effort to say that language change is sin gets people mired in impossibilities. I might just do a video on that at some point. One of my questions I can't seem to get an answer to from anyone in the King James only world is this. If there were a Wycliffe only movement, have you ever tried to read Wycliffe? It's really, really hard. What would you say to them? Or a Tyndale only movement, not as difficult, but still very difficult in places. Or a King James Gothic type movement. If you aren't willing or able to make any scriptural arguments against Wycliffe onlyism, do you have any wisdom arguments? Here are my specific replies, now that I've done a little more clarifying and some refining of what I at least do and don't mean by edification requires intelligibility. Let me turn to some of Christopher's more specific charges, concrete examples. Christopher says, my number one disagreement with Mark Ward's edification requires intelligibility principle is that the principle is not applied consistently across all Bible versions. One cannot say ERI when it comes to archaic words, but foreign objects and non-English words are exempt. At least it cannot be said honestly and without showing an exception clause. Christopher gives two examples that I believe must be taken seriously. The first I've mentioned briefly earlier. Sheol, he says, is not an English word. You cannot say ERI when it comes to besom, but then wink at Sheol. That is not consistent nor honest. He also picks up one of the discussions that I tried to have with him before feeling that we reached an impasse. He says, you also cannot say ERI when it comes to fetch a compass, but then ignore mandrakes. Difficult or foreign concepts can still be unintelligible and therefore unedifying according to the ERI claim which is being made. What shall we say to these things, brethren? Regarding Sheol, I think that Christopher really is onto something. I, too, follow one of my undergrad Bible teachers in thinking that for English translations to use the word Sheol, to transliterate the Hebrew rather than translate, is a bit of a cop-out. But thankfully, I'm not required to have only one Bible translation, so I think that it can be useful for a certain set of translators to translate the word Sheol, and for others to transliterate it, to say, when it comes to certain especially difficult Hebrew proper nouns, we're going to go with transliteration instead of translation. If we're stuck with only one translation, I would opt to translate Sheol according to the ERI principle. Hell, grave, the pit. These are what the King James translators chose, and I think those are good choices. Underworld is another viable option that the lexicons give. These are all intelligible to modern English speakers, as I presume Sheol was to the Hebrew-speaking Jews who first read that word in Genesis 37. But here's the thing. We don't know exactly how intelligible that word was to them, the original readers. Perhaps indeed the word did not mean grave to them, but something more specific, a specific place like Hades. If translators think that the word Sheol was difficult for or unknown to the word's original readers, then they are free to pick a difficult or unknown English word. ERI, remember, keys intelligibility to the level of intelligibility present in the original. And careful Bible students can differ in any given place as to how difficult a Hebrew or Greek word in the Bible is to understand. As for fetch a compass, I absolutely can cry ERI when it comes to fetch a compass, but then accept, not ignore, mandrakes, because I am keying intelligibility to the originals. I don't see why this should be contradictory. Mandrakes is not an archaic word for which we have an intelligible modern equivalent. No, it's a foreign thing that the all-wise God chose to talk about in the story of Rachel and Leah. I think that most translations need to preserve that kind of foreignness in most places, and to explain in a footnote if need be. But there is a contemporary equivalent to we fetched a compass that comes from Acts. We would say instead, we went around, or we circled around. That's not dummy English, is it? Fit only for gang members or people with SAT scores below 10. It's just English, contemporary English, our English. Christopher says, if you believe ERI to be a principle of the Bible to be applied to Bible translations, then be consistent. I think what I'm describing is consistent. As I've said before, so say I now again. If a given portion of the Bible is unintelligible, then translations should be too. If a given portion is archaic, then translations should be too. Let's talk for a minute then about Romans 13:13. Let us walk honestly, as in the day, not in rioting and drunkenness, not in chambering and wantonness, not in strife and envying. That's in the King James, of course. There are two words here that I think are unnecessarily archaic: chambering and wantonness. Modern translations go with immorality and debauchery, or sometimes sensuality for one of those words, which are not easy words, but are, by my definition, intelligible. They're the modern English equivalents of the Greek words there. But let's talk about chambering, which translates the Greek word koite. If Christopher can establish that koite was archaic and obscure to the Romans to whom Paul wrote, the way chambering is to modern English speakers, then I think he should definitely stick with King James's chambering. Using the word immorality would be wrong in that case. If Paul chose a then obsolete Greek word, we should choose now obsolete English words. But I sort of think Paul probably didn't do this. And why do I think that? 1 Corinthians 14. Christopher says, it's absolutely clear that as history progresses, translations are becoming less and less literal and less impactful. I simply disagree. I think what is clear is that as history progresses, translations always necessarily become less and less intelligible because of language change. It takes a long time, thankfully, for translations to be completely unintelligible, and we're not there yet with the King James. But we're about half a millennium closer than we were when William Tyndale first chose a lot of the words that eventually made it into the King James. Christopher and I have reached a number of impasses in our discussions in the past. As with many such disagreements, it can be hard to enumerate them. The fog of war obscures so much. I simply pray that Christopher and those he influences will take my responses and defenses in good faith. I'd like to end, however, by going on the offensive. I would like to ask Christopher Yetzer, my brother in Christ, I believe, my best opponent, the one who has listened the most and the most carefully, as far as I know, the one who works to avoid ad hominem arguments, to do something that no one else in any King James-only world has ever been willing to do, to my knowledge. I would like for Christopher Yetzer to watch or rewatch one of my 50 False Friends in the King James videos, let's say maybe the one on by and by, and for him to say one time, once, something like this: I confess that I myself, Christopher Yetzer, misunderstood by and by for all these years. When the King James has Salome saying, give me by and by in a charge or the head of John the Baptist, I didn't realize that by and by meant immediately. I thought it meant after a while, which is the way we use the word, the phrase, because the meaning of this English phrase has changed over the centuries. This is indeed a false friend. This specific example is one, and I'm grateful that Mark pointed it out to me and to other King James readers. Now I understand better than I did before. A few other King James onlyists have said something very like this to me in general. They've said, thank you for helping me understand the King James better. I just got a comment like this the other day. But not once. In the 4 years since my book came out, or the 2 years since I started my 50 False Friends in the King James YouTube series, has any King James onlyist of any stripe, publicly or privately, acknowledged an individual, specific false friend. The Trinitarian Bible Society's Westminster Reference Bible contains many of my false friends. The margin of D.A. Waite's defined King James Bible does too. It actually has a footnote saying that by and by meant immediately. I don't know why it's okay for D.A. Waite to teach false friends to people and not me. It would do much to increase my faith in others' good faith if leading King James onlyists would publicly and specifically acknowledge that I am not the only one who was missing a given false friend in the King James due to language change. I have learned a ton about the King James from my work on false friends. It's made me appreciate it all the more. To my King James only friends I say, almost I persuadest thee,